So before we actually kick off today's programme, what I'd like to do actually is ask Mark Cross, who we have here from the Thought Leadership Group of the Institute, to just say a few words about why this group was formed in the first place and what the challenge was that we were set. Mark has asked me to point out that he's not an actuary, so please keep the technical questions for the other actuaries that we'll hear from later. But Mark, if you just give us a few words of introduction, that would be great.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Alex said, I'm not an actuary, but I have for the last 4 years rising been the chair of your Research and Thought Leadership Committee and now Research and Thought Leadership Board. I started in 2014 and was appointed, amongst others, by David Hare, and in fact Deborah Cooper interviewed me as well. And one of the things that I was asked to do when I became the chair of this committee was to see how we could develop the research programme, see how we could look beyond just working parties, because what was clear was that the resource that was available by members in working parties was, shall we say, rather more limited currently than it had been maybe in decades past. And so we had to do something about it if you were going to be effective in delivering research at the leading edge. And hence, over the last 3 or 4 years, a number of things have happened to help facilitate the development of a broader, more in-depth kind of research, set of research programs. And the formation of the ARC is one of those. Another was in 2015, we put together a key questions document. Key questions for actuarial scientists. What things do you need to know? And as a consequence of that, and we put out a call for research, and I was then able to persuade the council to underwrite the funding for that call for research. And you may recall that we've sponsored 3 large programs on novel pension structures, on improved longevity modelling, and on dealing with large data. But there were 2 smaller areas that we put some money aside to look at in more detail. One of them was to do with behavioural finance, and the other was to do with economic modelling. And we did that because what became apparent when we had the applications in 2015 for these large programs was that these were both areas that you could only describe as a can of worms. What's more, as Deborah said about economic modelling, it's not even our can, referring to you as actuaries, of course. It's something that you're all influenced by. Shortly after we distributed the cash and started to get these programs underway, we then sat down to think, as a committee and working parties from that committee, on what do we do about economic modelling, and what do we do about behavioural finance. In the case of economic modelling, one of the things that happened alongside that was that the Economic and Science Research Council, that's the university's Research Council for Economic and Social Sciences, came up with £4 million to fund a programme over a period of 4 years simply to define what you needed to do in terms of macroeconomic modelling. So we realised that the few £100,000 that we had put aside wasn't going to get anywhere near it. The question was, how could we use that money effectively to try and advance your agenda as the actuarial community? And that really leads us to why we are where we are today. We've had a series of discussions, and we've had a working group, and you see the evidence of the criminals doing that today along the front bench here. And then we put out this current programme actually as the very starter of what do you do to try and give consideration to this area, to try and advance the science to support you in how you do your business. I find it very interesting when I was reading this report to think about the economic scenario generators. You see, I'm an engineer who spent my career building models. I thought this was a model, right? But apparently that's too narrow-minded to think about it that way. So I'm not going to impose my thoughts upon you, but I am going to be very interested to hear what Ian has to say and the rest of you during the course of this afternoon as I try and learn something about this complex subject. I have to say that it became absolutely clear to me that this was a can of worms about 2.5 years ago. I find it very interesting to read this report where it's still clearly a can of worms. Over to the rest of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.